Hello and welcome to the Alpine Valley School podcast. I'm your host, Miss Gallivan, a former AVS student, a graduate, and a current staff member at the school. This week on the show, we are talking about projects that students have undertaken while at school. For many kids, the opportunity to do what they want all day results in some truly impressive output. To give you an idea of some of the projects we've seen over the years, I'll list out some of my favorites. Raising and breeding betta fish, organizing and participating in talent shows, constructing a working trebuchet, which was then test-fired on an AVS family's farmland, painting the concrete floor of the sunny room over the summer one year, student-written and directed plays, there have been many, a student-edited magazine featuring the artwork and writing of other students, designing and sewing costumes for science fiction conventions, dance showcases, creating a grant request for and subsequently assembling a supercomputer. I could go on and on. This list hardly scratches the surface of what AVS students have done over the years, but I think this should give you a good sense. The projects that students undertake at school are as diverse as the kids themselves, and many of their contributions span generations in their longevity. Now that we're living in the digital age, students' projects are not always so easy to see. Whereas onlookers, parents mostly, get a warm feeling from seeing their child master a dance step or complete a chemistry experiment, the experience is typically different when the student's accomplishment is on YouTube. However, I can promise you that there is value in such pursuits. The world of the future is digital, and the more time students spend immersed in the online world, the more competent they will be in the workforce one day. So while it may not seem like much that your child created an entire house out of blocks in Minecraft, bear in mind that these activities also require tenacity and creativity, along with being fun. My guest today is Ethan Welshon, who is known for having undertaken some of the most ambitious projects the school has ever known. Ethan is the son of AVS founders Tammy and Larry Welshon and grew up at our school, so he has a lot to say about the experience. In addition to taking us through all the projects he worked on as a student, he also shares his somewhat rocky past with Judicial Committee and what he learned from finding himself on the wrong side of the law on a regular basis. Here's our conversation. Hi, Ethan. Thanks for being on the show.
Hey, Missa. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. How about you?
Doing well.
Good. Would you start by kind of giving us an introduction, who you are and your history with Alpine Valley School?
Yeah, so my name's Ethan Welshon. I started at the school when I was like 5 years old. Really, I started with the school well before that. My mom and dad started the school and kind of had the initial idea for starting this school. And so I was involved with, as a child, the process of starting the school and everything that went into that. So I was there from kind of the very beginning and then became an actual student when I was about 5.
And then you graduated as well, right?
That's right. Yeah, I did. So I spent my entire schooling career, apart from college, at AVS.
Wow. What is the earliest memory that you have of being at school?
So I think this one, it's kind of between two memories. So one is dancing in the main room, and then the other one is probably playing in the forest at the first building that we had. We had sort of this back lot that had a whole bunch of pine trees. It really wasn't that much of a forest, but as a child, it felt like a huge forest, and it had, big pine trees and bushes and stuff, and it was great. Yeah. So it's kind of between those two is my first memory there.
Are you thinking of the times that we used to dance at the old building in that main room or this main room?
No, at the old building, specifically to Barbie Girl by Aqua.
Yep, that's what I was thinking of too. Yep, I remember that very well.
Yeah, that's one of my first memories for sure.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you kind of is your legacy at AVS is all of the different projects you did at school. It seemed like you always had something going on, and I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about some of the projects you did while you were here.
Yeah, for sure. I think the one that stands out probably the most in my mind is a gold mine in the sandbox, which basically it started as this hypothesis when I was probably 8 or 9. My friend and I came up with this concept that because of the location of the school on an ancestral creek bed, that theoretically there could be gold in the creek bed below the sandbox. And so throughout the years, I took a geology class and got a hold of geological maps of the area, which in fact did reveal that Clear Creek did at one point flow through where the school was, and that it was built on top of that ancestral Clear Creek. And then so I think probably when I was about 17, I finally pursued it, and myself and a bunch of friends dug a huge hole in the sandbox. I think by the end it was I want to say like 16 feet deep. It was very deep, and we encountered a ton of groundwater, and so we got pumps and pumped out all the groundwater, and eventually made it down to this creek bed that we had seen on the maps and knew would be there. And so we basically pulled out all this riverbed sand and then processed it using a thing called a sluice box, which Ian and I built, and then basically recovered a decent amount of gold. If you were to multiply the amount of material that we removed and the amount of gold that we pulled from it, would be actually a feasible mining project. And in fact, in history, the Coors Corporation, during their construction projects, recovered tons of gold from the same ancestral Clear Creek in the same manner we did. Yeah, so there was definitely precedent. So we took the gold that we recovered from it and then made a display out of it and sold it at the school auction.
Great, and to benefit the school, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, all the proceeds went to the school.
That's awesome. So it's funny because it sounds like, when you say we went panning for gold in the sandbox, that sounds like some cute thing that you did for an afternoon, but really this was like a serious business project.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was actually kind of interesting because, at least half of it was political, essentially a political battle to be allowed to dig up the sandbox and essentially completely monopolize about half of the sandbox. We had it cordoned off with caution tape. We had shovels and a hoist and all this stuff in there. And so, a lot of it was fighting to keep the mine open. And that became sort of one of my major parts in it. And then, it was a big project. I mean, the whole thing took at least 3 months, I want to say. It was, wow. Yeah, it was a majority of a school year. In fact, it would have run on, but we ran into the end of the school year and closed it up towards the end and filled it up with all the water that we had pumped out that day, and then jumped in it like a swimming pool.
I was going to say, I remember people swimming in it.
Yeah. So we pumped out several thousand gallons. I'd say it was probably about 1,500 gallons, and then held that in a separate pond that we had built. And then built a channel and a dam and released it into the hole, and everyone jumped in it, and it was pretty cold, but a lot of fun.
Wow, that's quite an accomplishment. And how old were you when you did that?
So I mean, I came up with the concept when I was like 8 or 9. That's where I had the initial idea, and then when I actually did it, I think I was about 17.
Wow. And so you're responsible, I know, for at least one other piece of architecture at school that's still around. Yeah,
so I built the pergola, which is on the outside of the building, for my Eagle Scout project. I want to say that was that's probably also like 16 or 17 years old, right about there, maybe 18. I don't remember if that was before or after the mining project, but that was. That was a project for the Boy Scouts and the school, of course. It was to benefit the school. And so for that, I basically designed and then funded through finding donations of material and money funded the construction of this shade structure called a pergola, and then found a crew of peers, of people that went to the school and fellow Boy Scouts, and constructed it, and it's still standing today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. Cool. Well, those are some pretty major undertakings for a young person. What do you think that those projects taught you about yourself? Is there anything that you learned doing those things that you still rely on today as an adult?
Yeah, I think probably one of the most important things I learned from all that is who I am as a leader. What I mean by that is how I lead and how that plays in with people's methods of following and other leaders, and just with a variety of people. I find that for myself as a leader, I lead essentially from the front. By getting in and doing whatever it is that I'm leading people and doing, and then showing them how to do it, enabling them, and then eventually just handing it off to them and having them do it, and then moving on to the next part and repeating the process. So that's probably the biggest thing. The other thing I learned, one of the other major projects that I undertook was dealing with stormwater at the school. The school had a major issue with stormwater and roof leaks, and my dad was the building maintenance clerk at the time, and so there were a lot of times where he and I would go out in the middle of the night because it was raining. I mean, we'd wake up at like 1 o'clock in the morning because there was a rainstorm, and we'd go and fill sandbags and manage water and build trenches and stuff. And so from that, I learned that I really enjoy being in kind of an emergency environment and dealing with emergency type things. And that's been kind of a guiding light for me, and is something that I want to move more towards doing in my adult life.
Yeah, and you've done some of that type of work, haven't you? Or at least a class on the mine rescue is what I'm thinking of.
I was on the Colorado School of Mines competition mine rescue team, and actually when I first started with that team, we were actually also an on-call team. Although that didn't last very long. And so in that, we trained for mine rescue scenarios, and then a bunch of us actually found work during the summers working for a company that does mine rescue as basically a standby team for some mining work. And so I did, in fact, find quite a passion in doing emergency work. The other aspect of that is I got a certification as a wilderness first responder, and a lot of that is triage and emergency medicine.
Wow, well, those are useful skills to have.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely happy I have them.
Yeah. So the other thing that is maybe a part of your legacy at AVS that is maybe not as welcome is your history in judicial committee.
Yeah.
And it being somewhat extensive, certainly not more than others,
right.
But I wonder if you could tell me about what your experience was like in JC.
Well, first of all, I would argue that I think it actually probably is more than others. At the time, when I was there and the school was a little bit newer, people were a little bit more lenient. So I think I still do hold the record for the number of charges, which is like 200 in a year or something like that. It was insane. For me, my experience with JC at first was just frustrating. It was like, I go and do these things that I think are fun, and then somebody else doesn't like it, and they write me up, and I have to go to JC and face the consequences. Which not only did I have to do whatever the sentence was and whatever the consequence was, but I also had to sit in JC for hours. And I couldn't play during that time. I had to just sit quietly, and that I didn't really like that part. And so that was kind of that was the in the face part when I was a kid, and what that turned into is kind of figuring out that sometimes it was easier just to not do the thing that got me in trouble, and it was kind of just not worth it. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. And I think we see that a lot with kids, that they're just like, I just did a fun thing that happened to involve tripping this other kid. And I don't really see the problem with this. And of course, when you're on the other side of it, obviously it's a problem. What do you think there's anything specific, besides just like, I shouldn't do these things that get me in trouble, that you learned from being in JC so much?
Plausible deniability is key.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective.
No, but on a more serious note, I think what I said before really does capture the essence of it, is that even though something might be fun, the consequences of doing that fun thing for yourself and whoever's involved, whether they choose to be involved or not, it's not always worth it. They don't always end up being the most fun thing to do, and a lot of times people can get hurt, not necessarily physically, but emotionally and whatnot, and potentially physically, and you regret those things, and so I think it's just better to not get in as much trouble.
Yeah. So at one point, as I recall, or maybe it was more than one point, you were actually suspended because of the seriousness of the case that you were involved in. Can you tell me what that experience was like?
So I was suspended many times, and that was pretty hard for me. Actually being suspended usually resulted in working at my grandparents' house, which was like cleaning the house and working outside and things like that. And so there was a lot of physical labor involved. And then probably the biggest part for me was that all this time where I was sent away from school and couldn't come into school, all my friends were having fun and doing things without me, and like school life kept moving without me. And I'd come back and I'd be like, whoa, what the heck? You guys did all these fun things and I wasn't there. I think one that stands out is something that AVS has, is called an indefinite suspension, which is sort of like, it's like borderline expulsion. With an expulsion, you can't come back. You're done forever. With an indefinite suspension, you're done, but you could theoretically come back if you can appeal to the school meeting and convince them that you've changed your ways and you're now an eligible student to come back. And I was up for indefinite suspension one time. I think one of the most eye-opening things for me is that when it came to a vote, my dad actually voted in favor of indefinitely suspending me. Yeah, that was a huge eye-opener for me. And I ended up obviously not getting indefinitely suspended, but that was a huge eye-opener for me, and it was like, wow, I could actually lose all of this. Even though I was at a fairly young age, it's like I could lose all of this opportunity I have at school, and I'd have to go to public school or be homeschooled or something like that. I don't even know what would happen. It was pretty scary.
Yeah, that's a rough thing, I think, at any age. Like, if you told me at 18 that I was to have to leave AVS against my will and couldn't come back, that would have been pretty devastating. So I think it's that. So did you feel like you kind of bounced back after that? Did you?
Yeah, it definitely was a huge turning point, and kind of like an aha moment, where it's like, okay, now things need to change now. You need to get serious about correcting your habits and essentially being a better person. Yeah.
Well, that's good that happened and that you didn't have to leave the school in order to achieve that.
Yeah, for sure.
So how did your relationship with the judicial committee change as you got older, right? Like, you definitely had, it seems like, more of a struggle when you were younger, and then you had this moment where you're like, I got to turn things around. Were you ever eventually participating in JC from the other side of the table, like kind of taking
absolutely.
on that role more?
So I don't remember, if those two events coincided where I almost got indefinitely suspended, and then I became a JC chair. The JC chair runs the meeting. They're essentially the judge. They don't make a decision, but they run the meeting. They call for the vote, and they kind of are in charge of the whole meeting. So I went from being the person getting in trouble to the person handling the meetings for the people that did get in trouble, and having a much deeper understanding of the law and essentially firsthand experience with it, in that I was enforcing it and at the time also making it. There was a lot of lawmaking going on at the time. And so, I went from being the person that was in JC all the time because I was in trouble to the person that chose to be in JC all the time to help the people that were getting in trouble and help the justice process, which for me made sense because I had experienced it from both ends. And in fact, that was when I ran for JC clerk, that was a major point in my campaign, was that, look, I probably have the most experience with getting in trouble here out of anybody, according to the record. I know exactly what it's like to be in all those situations. I think I know how to help people, and I think I know how to make it a better process and how to find justice for all of them.
Yeah. And it seems like you probably had more empathy for the people who were coming before JC, having violated the law in some way, to not just pass judgment.
Absolutely. And for me, it was so easy to put myself in their shoes. Like, this is why they did that. This is why they did whatever they did. What was going through their head when they did it. Because a lot of that kind of stuff I had done myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the messages we try as staff to get across to parents, especially of new students, is if your student struggles in JC, like they're in JC all the time, multiple times a day, let's say, it's not the end of the world. It's part of the process, and it depends obviously on what they're in JC for. If they're getting written up for punching people, we got a problem. But if they're getting written up for leaving their lunch out, right, or running down the hallway or leaving a mess out or whatever, like, it's not a crisis. And even if they get suspended, it's just us saying, like, you're not meeting the standard that we want you to meet, and there's still a chance for you to do that. Yeah. So I wonder if you have any advice. So if you can kind of imagine in your mind someone similar to yourself as a young person who's getting written up all the time, pretty much for just doing stuff that they think is fun, that maybe other people don't think is fun. What would you say to that young person?
I think my biggest piece of advice for somebody in that situation would be, think about how you're affecting other people. You're not the only person in a community. If you run down the hall and bump into somebody else, that affects their life, and it's not right to basically inflict your life on somebody else's unwillingly. If they want to play rough and it's within the rules, you can do that. Or if you want to run around together outside, that's fine. But involving somebody in your shenanigans that doesn't want to be involved isn't necessarily right. And you probably wouldn't want to be involved in somebody's shenanigans without volunteering for it. The other thing is, just think about your time, and if you're wasting all this time doing dumb stuff, and getting in trouble for it and having to face the consequences, there's probably fun things you could do during that time that you wouldn't get in trouble for, and then you can do more fun things.
Yeah. So like the trade-off,
yeah,
considering
exactly.
the trade-off.
Is it really worth doing whatever it is that you're going to get in trouble for?
Yeah. That's a good perspective. So now that you are an adult and you're out in the world, have you had any thoughts or reflections on a particular skill that you learned at AVS that's serving you now?
Yeah. I think probably one of the biggest ones is self-analysis, and that kind of links back to the JC topic and getting in trouble. During that, getting in trouble a lot and stuff, I spent a lot of time kind of self-analyzing and figuring out, why did I do this? And how could I prevent myself from doing this in the future? And so I think self-analysis in a big way, not just like what am I doing wrong and how can I correct it, but like what could I be doing better, or why am I getting bored, things like that. I think self-analysis is probably the biggest thing that I learned at AVS that I still use. After that is probably self-drive. I'm not. It's hard to say whether that was learned or inherent. I think it's probably learned. I definitely know people that were not self-driven and then became self-driven. And it's sort of just a self-starter, self-driven person. That's very useful. I think the last major thing is just problem solving. Not necessarily in like the printer is jammed, remove the back tray, shake it 3 times and do the hokey pokey and put it back in. But, solving problems amongst people. I did a ton of that at school, both as JC clerk and then just in my various friends groups and whatnot. Anytime you have a group of people, somebody's going to have a problem with somebody else. And if you can step in and make that system go smoother, that's a good thing. And that's something that I do a lot in my adult life, both at work and with my adult friends.
Yeah, and not to mention you had to defend the giant hole in the sandbox.
Yeah, I did have to defend my mining project.
It's probably a good practice in that.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
Sure.
To be clear, I have no interest in going into lobbying, if anybody's thinking that.
You learned that lesson, huh?
I definitely learned that lesson and am not interested in doing that again.
Okay, understood. Yeah. So besides, we talked about all of the stuff that you've done at school, and I just want to point out too that I think we made it sound maybe like you spent a lot of your time at school just being a criminal, but you certainly weren't. And my memories of you, even at 5 years old, were that you were just this super charming, driven, playful, happy kid who, like you said, didn't always think about the end result of what was going to happen. Like if you did this thing. And so I just want to throw that out there too, that you weren't like this hardened criminal going through and doing all this crazy stuff. You were a lovely person. You just had a difficult time staying within the boundaries.
Well, thank you. I never was one for coloring within the lines.
Yes. So I wonder if you have a favorite memory of life at AVS.
Wow. I think talking to people at the main room table. That's, I can't pinpoint one specific one. For listeners that have maybe listened to some of these other podcasts, I'm sure that has been brought up a couple times. The conversations that take place at the main room table are like nothing else. I mean, I've never experienced them anywhere else apart from with a bunch of AVS people at the table, and it's really amazing. And I think that's if I could somehow capture that. That would be like the essence of the school, is these deep intellectual conversations that just have no bounds. I mean, they can go from talking about one thing to another very quickly, and they're not bounded by convention of what you can and can't talk about by any means. They're incredibly deep and very intellectual and just fun, just fun to have and fun to listen to.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's certainly been echoed by others, and I completely agree. Many of those are fond memories. So thanks for sharing that. So that's all I have for today. I really appreciate your time, and I know you shared some things that were pretty personal and maybe intense from your childhood, and I really appreciate you opening up about that. Great. Well, thanks again, and have a great night. Outsiders might be surprised by just how many students struggle with the rules at AVS over their first few years at school. As Bruce Smith observed on our last show, it can take a long time to learn how to be at a school like ours, and sometimes that means bumping up against the judicial system. However, I think Ethan's story provides a long-term view of what it can mean for kids who choose to change their ways and stick it out, becoming contributing members of the school. And as Ethan pointed out, being written up a lot can help the student feel empathy for others who are also struggling to follow the rules. At first glance, it can seem very easy to attend a school like AVS. Kids just get to do what they want all day, right? But in reality, we're asking a great deal of them. They have to be responsible, truly responsible for themselves. And for many, it's the first time in their lives they've had that experience. Being part of a community where you may not always agree or get along with everyone takes work, and it's something that adults aren't even willing to do many times. Ask anyone who's had a difficult neighborly relationship. But we are asking our kids to do it every day and to limit their interactions to what is allowed within the school's laws. It's a difficult undertaking even for kids like me who are natural rule followers. I got written up a few times, mostly for leaving messes, so I can say that it truly does happen to everyone. That said, how long they continue to break the laws and how many times they repeat the same offenses, well, that's up to the student. And as Ethan learned firsthand, there is a limit. If we as a community don't see the kind of change we expect in a student, then it may be time to question whether or not they can succeed at a school like ours. However, I feel safe in saying that most of the time, students are able to work out their difficulties and take responsibility for themselves at school, but it does take time and effort. I know I've mentioned this on the show before, but I want to drop another quick plug for Amazon Smile. If you shop at Amazon, and I know you do, please consider using Amazon Smile for your online shopping. Every time you make a purchase, AVS receives a donation at no additional cost to you. If everyone in our extended community were to use this service every time they shop, well, it would all add up to something very substantial. Amazon Smile is an easy way to support the school and help us keep doing our important work without any additional hassle or cost on your end. Simply visit www.smile.amazon.com and select Alpine Valley School as the nonprofit organization you wish to benefit. As always, thanks for listening and for sending your suggestions. Keep them coming to podcast@alpinevalley.school.com. I do read every one of your messages. I'm Miss Gallivan. This is the Alpine Valley School podcast, and we'll be back again soon with more stories of real learning for real life.